Simple black woman helped a poor man, unaware he was a billionaire. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's diner flickered one last time before going dark forever. Tasha Owens stood in the empty restaurant, her apron still tied around her waist, staring at the hastily written note taped to the cash register. Closed permanently. Sorry for the inconvenience. Sorry for the inconvenience? Tasha almost laughed if it weren't so tragic. This wasn't an inconvenience. This was her second job, the one that helped her make ends meet every month. The one that put food on the table for her and her 8-year-old son, Malik. She pulled out her phone and called the owner, Mr. Murphy, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried 3 more times. Nothing. The man had vanished like morning mist, leaving 12 employees without paychecks, without notice, without hope. Outside, rain began to fall on the cracked pavement of East Side Boulevard. Tasha pulled her jacket tighter and walked to her beat-up Honda Civic. The engine sputtered twice before starting, another problem she couldn't afford to fix. "Mom, why are you home so early?" Malik asked when she walked through the door of their small apartment. He was at the kitchen table, homework spread out, a half-eaten peanut butter sandwich beside his math book. "The diner closed, baby," she said, hanging her coat on the back of a chair. "But don't worry. We'll figure it out." Malik's eyes, too wise for his 8 years, studied her face. "Are we gonna be okay?" Tasha knelt beside his chair and smoothed his hair. "We're always okay, remember? We just have to be smart about it." But smart wasn't going to pay next month's rent. Smart wasn't going to fill the refrigerator. Smart wasn't going to keep them from losing the tiny apartment that had been their sanctuary for 2 years. That night, after Malik fell asleep, Tasha sat at her laptop, scrolling through job listings. Everything required experience she didn't have, education she couldn't afford, or hours that would mean leaving Malik alone too much. The cursor blinked mockingly on the screen. Then she remembered the housing grant application she'd started months ago. The East Side Community Development Grant could provide assistance with rent and utilities, enough to give her breathing room to find steady work. But there was a catch. Applicants needed to complete 40 hours of community service. The next morning, Tasha dropped Malik at school and drove to the address she'd found online for volunteer opportunities. Haven Hands Community Center sat on the corner of 2 streets she'd driven past 1,000 times, but never really noticed. The building looked like it had seen better decades: faded brick walls, windows that needed washing, and a wooden sign that hung slightly crooked. Inside, the smell of disinfectant mixed with something she couldn't identify. Maybe hope, maybe desperation. The lobby was cramped but clean, with mismatched chairs and a reception desk that had seen better days. A woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair looked up from a stack of papers. "You hear about the job posting?" the woman asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "Actually, I'm looking to volunteer," Tasha said. "I need community service hours for a grant application." The woman's expression shifted slightly. "I'm Margaret Winters, coordinator here. We can always use help, but this isn't some easy community service where you sit around and chat. We serve real people with real problems." "I understand," Tasha replied. "I'm not afraid of hard work." Margaret studied her for a long moment, then handed her a clipboard. "Fill this out. If you're serious, you can start today. We serve lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Food pantry is open mornings. Clothing distribution on Wednesdays." The paperwork was simple enough, but Tasha noticed something odd: several sections asking about her employment history, references, and even her personal financial situation. It seemed like a lot of information for volunteer work, but she filled it out anyway. By noon, Tasha was in the kitchen, ladling soup into bowls alongside 2 other volunteers. The people who came through the line were exactly what Margaret had warned her about: real people with real problems. There was Mrs. Rodriguez, who whispered that she was choosing between her heart medication and groceries this month. There was Tommy, a veteran with shaking hands who thanked her 3 times for each bowl of soup. There was Sarah, barely 18, with a baby on her hip and exhaustion in her eyes. And there was Alton. He appeared at the end of the lunch line, just as Tasha was wondering if they'd have enough soup. He was thin, maybe in his 40s, with graying hair that needed cutting and clothes that had seen too many washes. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, intelligent, observant, like he was seeing everything and saying nothing. "Good afternoon," Tasha said, filling his bowl. "I'm Tasha. I don't think I've seen you before." He nodded but didn't speak, just took his soup and moved to a corner table where he ate alone. "Don't bother with him," said Janet, another volunteer. "He's been coming here for weeks. Never says more than 2 words. Probably has problems, if you know what I mean." But Tasha did bother. Something about Alton intrigued her. During the afternoon clothing distribution, she noticed him helping an elderly man find a coat that fit. When a child dropped her toy, Alton picked it up and handed it back with the gentlest smile. That evening, as rain pounded the windows, Tasha was cleaning up the dinner service when she heard raised voices from the front lobby. "I don't care if he's been coming here for weeks," a man's voice said sharply. "He has no identification, no address, no nothing. This is a liability issue." Tasha moved toward the sound and saw David Chen, the evening supervisor, confronting Alton near the entrance. Alton stood quietly, water dripping from his worn coat, saying nothing in his defense. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," David continued. "We can't have people here who won't provide basic information." "He's not causing any trouble," Tasha interrupted, stepping between them. "He helps other people. He's quiet and respectful." David turned to her with irritation. "You're new here. You don't understand how things work. We have rules for a reason. What rule says you can't help someone just because they don't have an ID?" Tasha asked, her voice steady but firm. "Isn't that exactly who needs help the most?" The lobby had gone quiet. Other volunteers and a few lingering clients watched the confrontation unfold. "Look, miss," David glanced at her name tag. "Tasha. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but some people are just beyond help. This man could be dangerous. He could be anyone. He could be someone's father," Tasha replied. "Someone's son. Someone who's just down on his luck and needs a little kindness." She turned to Alton, who had been listening to the exchange with an unreadable expression. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." Alton looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. David threw up his hands. "Fine. But if anything happens, it's on you." He stalked off toward his office. Tasha led Alton to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee. They sat at the small table where staff usually ate their meals. "I'm sorry about that," she said. "Some people forget that we're all just trying to get by." Alton wrapped his hands around the warm mug and spoke for the first time since she'd met him. His voice was soft but clear. "Thank you? You don't have to thank me," Tasha said. "This is supposed to be a place where people help each other." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rain against the windows. Finally, Alton stood to leave. "Will you be back tomorrow?" Tasha asked. He paused at the door. "If it's all right with you." "It's all right with me." After he left, Tasha finished cleaning up and gathered her things. Margaret approached her as she was putting on her coat. "That was interesting," Margaret said, her tone neutral. "What was?" "The way you handled David. Most volunteers don't challenge staff members on their first day." Tasha shrugged. "I just think everyone deserves to be treated with dignity." Margaret studied her face for a moment, then made a note on her clipboard. "I'll see you tomorrow, Tasha." Walking to her car, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that something important had happened tonight. She couldn't put her finger on what it was, but defending Alton had felt like more than just standing up for someone who needed help. It had felt like a test. And somehow, she knew she had passed. At home, Malik was asleep on the couch, his homework completed and stacked neatly on the coffee table. Tasha covered him with a blanket and made herself a cup of tea. Tomorrow, she would go back to Haven Hands. Tomorrow, she would continue accumulating the community service hours she needed for the grant. But tonight she couldn't stop thinking about Alton's eyes, how they seemed to see everything, how they held secrets she couldn't begin to imagine. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean and preparing the ground for whatever was coming next. 3 weeks into her volunteer work at Haven Hands, Tasha began to notice things that didn't add up. Small things at first, the kind that made her pause but not enough to raise alarm bells. The food pantry, for instance, was always fully stocked. Every morning when she arrived, the shelves were loaded with fresh produce, canned goods, and frozen meals. But she never saw delivery trucks. She never witnessed volunteers unloading boxes or stocking shelves. It was as if the food materialized overnight. "Where do all these donations come from?" she asked Janet one morning as they organized breakfast items. Janet shrugged without looking up. "Anonymous donors, I guess. We don't ask questions around here." "Don't ask questions?" That seemed to be Haven Hands' unofficial motto. Then there were the computers. 3 desktop computers sat in the main office. But every time Tasha walked by, the screens were locked. Password protected. Even Margaret's computer screen went dark the moment anyone approached her desk. "Just security protocol," Margaret explained when Tasha mentioned it. "We handle sensitive information about our clients." But what sensitive information? Most of the people who came to Haven Hands were like Alton: no addresses, no paperwork, no official documentation of any kind. The whispers started during her 4th week. Tasha would enter a room, and conversations would stop mid-sentence. Volunteers would exchange glances she wasn't supposed to catch. Staff members would lower their voices when she passed by. It felt like being back in high school, except this time she couldn't figure out what she'd done wrong. The strangest incident happened on a Wednesday morning. Tasha had arrived early to help with the clothing distribution when she overheard Margaret on the phone in her office. "Yes, she's working out well," Margaret was saying. "Very compassionate. Exactly what we're looking for. No, she doesn't suspect anything. I'll keep monitoring the situation." When Margaret emerged from her office moments later, she seemed startled to see Tasha. "You're here early," Margaret said, quickly closing her office door behind her. "I wanted to get a head start on sorting the donations," Tasha replied, studying Margaret's face. "That's very dedicated of you." Margaret's smile seemed forced. "I'll be in meetings most of the morning. Think you can handle things out here?" More meetings. More locked doors. More secrets. It was during lunch service that week when Tasha met Melanie Torres, a volunteer who'd been coming to Haven Hands for 6 months. Melanie was friendly enough, too friendly, actually. She asked lots of questions about Tasha's background, her living situation, her reasons for volunteering. "So you're applying for the housing grant?" Melanie asked while they cleaned tables together. "How did you know that?" Tasha hadn't mentioned the grant to anyone except Margaret during her initial paperwork. "Oh, word gets around," Melanie said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "This is a small place. We all know each other's business eventually." That afternoon, Tasha needed to retrieve her purse from the volunteer storage room. The door was slightly ajar, and she could hear voices inside, Melanie's voice, specifically. "I need copies of everything," Melanie was saying. "Her application, her financial information, her references. Everything." "I don't know," another voice replied. It sounded like Janet. "This feels wrong." "Wrong? We're trying to help deserving people get assistance. Wouldn't you want to know if someone was lying on their application?" Tasha pressed closer to the door, her heart racing. "But copying someone's personal information without permission? Look, I've been here longer than anyone except Margaret. I know how these things work. Some people deserve help, and others are just gaming the system." Tasha's blood ran cold. She pushed open the door to find Melanie hunched over a stack of papers. Papers that looked suspiciously like the grant application forms from the community services office down the street. "Tasha!" Melanie jumped up, scattering the papers. "I didn't hear you come in. What are you doing with those?" Tasha asked, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Oh, these? I'm just helping Janet organize some files. Nothing important." Melanie began gathering the papers quickly. But Tasha had seen enough. At the top of one page, she'd glimpsed her own name and social security number. "Those are my grant application documents," she said firmly. "How did you get them?" "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Melanie said, her friendly demeanor evaporating. "These are general community service forms. Maybe you're confused because you're new here." "I'm not confused." Tasha stepped forward. "Those are copies of my personal information, and I want to know why you have them." The room went silent. Janet had backed against the wall, looking like she wanted to disappear. "You know what?" Melanie's voice turned sharp. "Maybe you're the one who's been taking things that don't belong to you. I've heard other volunteers mention missing personal items." "What are you talking about?" "Purses left unattended. Personal belongings disappearing. Maybe we should check your locker." It was a setup. Tasha could see it in Melanie's eyes, the calculation, the preparation. This confrontation wasn't spontaneous. "Check my locker," Tasha said. "I have nothing to hide." But even as she said it, a chill ran down her spine. What if something had been planted there? What if this was all part of some larger plan she couldn't see? That evening, Alton appeared beside her table as she was finishing her dinner cleanup. He'd been coming to Haven Hands regularly since their first meeting, always quiet, always observant. But tonight something was different in his demeanor. "You should be careful," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Careful of what?" Instead of answering directly, he slipped a small piece of paper into her hand. "Not everyone here is who they seem to be." Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the evening crowd of people leaving the center. Tasha looked at the paper. Written in neat handwriting was a series of numbers, 847-2191A. She stared at the code, trying to make sense of it. A phone number? A combination? Some kind of identification number? The next morning, Tasha arrived at Haven Hands to find her volunteer locker empty. Her spare jacket, her emergency snacks, even the small photo of Malik she kept taped inside, all gone. Her name had been removed from the volunteer roster on the bulletin board. Margaret was waiting for her in the main lobby, holding a clipboard and wearing an expression Tasha had never seen before, cold, dismissive, almost hostile. "Ms. Owens, I need to speak with you privately." In Margaret's office, Tasha found herself facing a formal complaint form with her name at the top. The allegations were stunning: theft of personal property, violation of client confidentiality, and disruptive behavior toward other volunteers. "This is ridiculous," Tasha said, scanning the document. "None of this is true." "We take these accusations very seriously," Margaret replied. "Several volunteers have come forward with concerns about your behavior." "What volunteers? What concerns?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics. But given the seriousness of these allegations, I'm afraid we'll have to terminate your volunteer position here." Tasha stared at Margaret, seeing her clearly for the first time. The woman who had seemed merely stern was actually calculating. The questions during intake, the mysterious full pantry, the locked computers, the whispered conversations, it all pointed to something much larger than a simple community center. "This place isn't what it seems, is it?" Tasha asked. Margaret's expression didn't change. "This place isn't for people like you." "People like you." The words hit Tasha like a physical blow. She'd heard variations of that phrase her entire life, and it never got easier. Walking to her car, clutching Alton's mysterious note, Tasha realized she'd stumbled into something far more complicated than she'd imagined. Haven Hands wasn't just a community center. It was something else entirely. And somehow, she'd failed a test she didn't even know she was taking. For 3 days, Tasha didn't go anywhere near Haven Hands. She spent the time job hunting, filling out applications, and trying to figure out what the numbers on Alton's note meant. 847-2191A. She tried calling it as a phone number, but it wasn't in service. She'd searched online, but nothing came up. The code remained a mystery. She missed seeing Alton, though. In the weeks she'd volunteered, he'd become a constant presence, quiet, helpful, always watching. She wondered if he was still getting meals at Haven Hands or if Margaret had banned him too. On Thursday morning, as she walked out of another unsuccessful job interview at a grocery store, she saw him. But this wasn't the Alton she knew. The man standing beside a sleek black Mercedes in the parking lot wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His hair was professionally cut, his shoes polished to a shine. He looked like he'd stepped out of a business magazine. The only thing familiar was his eyes, those same intelligent, observant eyes that had watched everything at Haven Hands. Tasha stopped walking, convinced she was seeing things. This couldn't be the same person. The man approached her with a slight smile. "Hello, Tasha." The voice was unmistakable. Soft, clear, careful. It was definitely Alton. I don't understand," she stammered. "What's happening? Who are you?" "That's a long story," he said. "Would you mind getting in the car? I think it's time we talked." Every instinct told her to run. This was too strange, too impossible. The homeless man she'd defended was standing here in $1,000 clothes next to a car that cost more than she'd make in 5 years. But something in his expression, the same gentleness she'd seen when he helped the elderly man find a coat, made her trust him. The interior of the Mercedes was like stepping into another world. Leather seats, polished wood trim, and a silence so complete it felt like being wrapped in velvet. Alton started the engine, and classical music played softly from speakers she couldn't see. "My full name is Alton Mercer," he said as they pulled onto the main road. "You might have heard of Mercer Technologies." Tasha's breath caught. Everyone had heard of Mercer Technologies. The company had revolutionized cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and digital security. Forbes magazine called Alton Mercer one of the most influential tech entrepreneurs of his generation. His net worth was estimated in the billions. "That's impossible," she whispered. You were homeless. You had no ID. You ate soup from the charity kitchen." "I was never homeless," Alton said gently. "I was conducting research." They stopped at a red light, and he turned to look at her directly. "Haven Hands isn't just a community center, Tasha. It's a project I created 3 years ago. A hidden philanthropy initiative designed to identify people with genuine compassion, not people looking to build their resumes or feel good about themselves, but individuals who truly care about others without expecting anything in return." Tasha's mind raced. "You were testing us? Everyone who works or volunteers at Haven Hands is being observed. We use discrete cameras, behavioral analysis, and situational challenges to assess character. The full pantry that never seems to need restocking? I fund it completely, but we want to see how volunteers react to abundance they can't explain. The locked computers? They're running analysis software, tracking patterns of behavior." The light turned green, and they continued driving through neighborhoods Tasha had never seen, places where houses had circular driveways and gates. "Over the past 3 years, we've evaluated hundreds of potential candidates. People who seem perfect on paper, graduate degrees, impressive volunteer histories, glowing recommendations. But when faced with real challenges, when nobody was watching, they failed." "Failed how?" "They treated clients poorly when supervisors weren't around. They took credit for other people's work. They avoided the difficult cases and gravitated towards situations that would look good on their resumes. They were there for themselves, not for the community." Tasha thought about Melanie, about David Chen's attitude toward Alton, about the whispered conversations and calculating glances. "But you," Alton continued, "were different from the beginning. You defended me when a supervisor wanted to throw me out. You treated everyone with dignity regardless of their circumstances. You asked questions about inequities you observed. And when someone tried to sabotage you, you stood your ground without compromising your principles." They pulled into the parking lot of an upscale coffee shop. Through the windows, Tasha could see people in business suits conducting meetings over lattes that probably cost more than her lunch budget for a week. "I still don't understand," she said. "Why go through all this? Why not just, I don't know, interview people normally?" Alton turned off the engine and faced her fully. Because anyone can say the right things in an interview. Anyone can write a compelling essay about their commitment to helping others. But character is revealed through actions when people think nobody important is watching. And you think I have character? I know you do. That's why you've been selected. Selected for what? Alton smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since this surreal conversation began. To head the Haven Legacy Project. A $20 million community investment fund that will operate under your leadership. You'll have complete authority to decide how the money is distributed, what programs to fund, which initiatives to support. Tasha felt dizzy. $20 million? You want me to be in charge of $20 million? The public announcement will be made next week. But before that happens, there's one final phase you need to complete. Of course there was. Nothing about this situation was simple. What kind of final phase? Someone inside Haven Hands discovered the truth about the project. They'd been working to sabotage your evaluation, to ensure you'd be eliminated before the selection process was complete. We need to find out who it is and how deep the corruption goes. Tasha thought about her emptied locker, the false accusations, Melanie's cold calculation when she'd been caught with the copied documents. You already know it's Melanie, she said. We suspect Melanie is involved, but she's not working alone. The operation is too sophisticated, too coordinated. Someone with higher level access is feeding her information and helping her manipulate the system. Alton reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a smartphone but with additional buttons and a different interface entirely. This will give you access to the Real Haven Hands, the cameras, the files, the communications we've been monitoring. Tomorrow, you'll go back as if nothing has changed. You'll apologize to Margaret, ask for a second chance, whatever it takes to get back inside. Then you'll gather evidence of who's working against the project. And if they try to hurt me, they won't get the chance, Alton said firmly. I'll be watching everything. The moment you're in real danger, I'll intervene. Tasha held the device, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to hold so much power, so much responsibility. Why me? She asked quietly. Out of hundreds of people, why am I the one you chose? Alton's expression softened. Because when you saw someone who needed help, you helped them. You didn't ask what was in it for you. You didn't calculate the personal benefit. You simply saw another human being who deserved dignity and respect, and you acted accordingly. He paused, looking out at the coffee shop where successful people made deals and built careers. Most people fail that test, Tasha. Most people, when they think nobody important is watching, reveal who they really are. And who they really are is disappointing. But not me. Not you. You're exactly the kind of person this world needs more of. The question is, are you ready to help me prove that compassion and integrity can change everything? The next morning, Tasha stood outside Haven Hands, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The device Alton had given her was hidden in her jacket pocket, and she practiced her apology speech 3 times in the car. She had to get back inside. She had to find out who was working with Melanie to destroy everything Alton had built. Margaret looked surprised when Tasha walked through the front door. Ms. Owens, Margaret said, her voice carefully neutral. I thought we'd resolved your situation here. I came to apologize, Tasha said, forcing humility into her voice. I think I misunderstood what happened the other day. I was stressed about my financial situation, and I may have overreacted to what was probably just a simple misunderstanding. Margaret studied her face for a long moment. I see. I was hoping you might give me another chance. I really need those community service hours for my grant application, and I genuinely enjoyed helping people here. I promise to be more cooperative. The word tasted bitter in Tasha's mouth, but she saw something shift in Margaret's expression. Interest, maybe? Or satisfaction? Well, Margaret said slowly, everyone deserves a second chance. But you'll be on probation. Any more disruptions, and you're permanently banned. I understand completely. By afternoon, Tasha was back in the kitchen, serving lunch alongside Janet and 2 other volunteers she didn't recognize. She kept her head down, worked diligently, and listened carefully to every conversation around her. That's when she activated the device for the first time. The screen came alive with multiple camera feeds from throughout Haven Hands. She could see Margaret's office, the storage rooms, even angles of the kitchen where she was currently working. More importantly, she could access files, personnel records, financial documents, and communication logs that revealed the true scope of what was happening. What she found made her blood run cold. Melanie Torres wasn't just copying grant applications. She'd been systematically documenting every volunteer who showed promise, then sabotaging their evaluations. Over the past 6 months, she'd eliminated 12 potential candidates through false accusations, planted evidence, and carefully orchestrated conflicts. But the financial records were even more shocking. Someone had been skimming money from the Haven Hands budget, not the operational funds that Alton provided, but grants and donations that were supposed to go to actual community programs. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been redirected to fake organizations with impressive names. Urban Youth Development Initiative, Senior Care Outreach Network, Family Stability Foundation. All of them traced back to the same bank account. All of them controlled by Margaret Winters. Tasha was so absorbed in the files that she almost didn't notice Melanie approaching her station. "You're back," Melanie said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I heard you apologize to Margaret. That was very mature of you. I realized I was wrong," Tasha replied, not looking up from the soup she was ladling. "I let my emotions get the better of me. It happens to the best of us. I'm just glad we can all move forward now." But as Melanie walked away, Tasha caught her reflection in the stainless steel surface of the serving counter. Melanie was smiling, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who thought they'd won. That evening, after most volunteers had left, Tasha used the device to access the security cameras in Margaret's office. She watched as Margaret opened a locked filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. Even from the camera angle, Tasha could see her own name on the tab. Margaret opened the folder and began making notes. Then she picked up her phone. "It's handled," Margaret said into the phone. "She came back today, just like you said she would. Apologetic, cooperative, completely defeated." Tasha couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Margaret's responses painted a clear picture. "No, she doesn't suspect anything about the real operation. Yes, I've been documenting everything for the final report. The money transfers are all complete. Once we eliminate her permanently, we can wrap up this phase." Margaret hung up and returned the folder to the filing cabinet. But as she locked it, she looked directly at one of the security cameras, almost as if she knew someone was watching. Tasha's hands trembled as she switched off the device. Margaret knew about the surveillance system. Somehow, she'd figured out that Haven Hands was more than it appeared to be, and she was using that knowledge to steal millions of dollars while systematically destroying the people Alton was trying to help. The next morning, Tasha arrived early, determined to gather more evidence. She used the device to access Margaret's computer files, following digital trails that led to offshore accounts and shell companies. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Margaret had been running this scam for over 2 years, stealing from genuine charitable causes and pocketing money meant for the community's most vulnerable people. But as Tasha worked, she noticed something troubling. The other volunteers were watching her differently today. Their glances were sharper, more calculating. When she entered rooms, conversations didn't just pause, they stopped entirely. At lunch, she overheard Melanie talking to Janet near the storage room. "She's definitely up to something," Melanie was saying. "Did you see how she was acting yesterday? All humble and apologetic? That's not the same woman who confronted David about that homeless guy. Maybe she really did learn her lesson," Janet replied uncertainly. "People like her don't learn lessons. They just get better at hiding their true nature." That afternoon, Tasha was organizing donated clothes when she found herself alone in the storage room with Melanie and another volunteer she'd never seen before, a large man with cold eyes who introduced himself as Rick. "We need to talk," Melanie said, positioning herself between Tasha and the door. "About what?" About why you're really here, Rick said, stepping closer. About what you're really looking for. Tasha's mouth went dry. I don't know what you mean. Cut the act, Melanie snapped. We know you didn't just come back here to apologize. People don't change overnight. You're investigating something, and we want to know what it is. I'm just trying to complete my community service hours. Bullshit. Rick moved even closer, using his size to intimidate her. You've been asking too many questions, looking at things that aren't your business. That stops now. Tasha glanced toward the door, calculating her chances of getting past them. The storage room suddenly felt very small, very isolated. Look, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I don't want any trouble. I just need these hours for my grant application. That's all. Melanie smiled, but her eyes remained hard. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to finish out this week, get your precious hours, and then you're going to disappear. You're never going to come back here, never going to talk to anyone about what you've seen, and never going to cause any more problems. And if I don't? Rick cracked his knuckles. Then we'll make sure you can't cause problems for anyone, anywhere, ever again. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Tasha realized she was in real danger, not just of losing her volunteer position, but of something much worse. Do we understand each other? Melanie asked sweetly. Before Tasha could answer, the storage room door burst open. Alton stepped inside, but this wasn't the quiet homeless man or even the polished businessman. This was someone else entirely, someone with authority, power, and barely controlled anger. I think, he said quietly, we all need to have a very serious conversation. The silence in the storage room was deafening. Melanie's face went white. Rick took a step backward, his intimidating posture crumbling like paper in rain. They recognized Alton, not as the homeless man they'd dismissed, but as someone far more dangerous. Mr. Mercer, Melanie stammered. We didn't know you were threatening my chosen candidate? Alton's voice remained calm, but Tasha could see the steel underneath. Attempting to silence someone who discovered your theft operation? Planning to make sure she can't cause problems for anyone, anywhere, ever again? Rick's eyes darted toward the door, but Alton moved to block his path. Oh yes, I heard everything, Alton continued. Did you really think I'd design a surveillance system without monitoring my own project? Every word you've spoken, every threat you've made, every dollar you've stolen, it's all been recorded. From his jacket, Alton pulled out a tablet and turned the screen toward them. Security footage played clearly, Melanie copying Tasha's documents, Rick planting stolen items in other volunteers' lockers, Margaret making phone calls about money transfers to offshore accounts. 2 years, Alton said, his voice heavy with disappointment. For 2 years, you've been destroying everything this project was meant to accomplish. You've stolen over $800,000 meant for genuine community programs. You've systematically eliminated good people who could have made a real difference. And you've turned a place designed to help people into a criminal operation. Melanie tried to speak, but Alton held up his hand. Margaret Winters is already in police custody. We arrested her an hour ago when she tried to make another transfer to the Urban Youth Development Initiative, which, by the way, doesn't exist except as a bank account in the Cayman Islands. The tablet screen switched to show Margaret being led out of the building in handcuffs, her face a mask of rage and defeat. The FBI has been building a case for months, Alton continued. Financial fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement from charitable organizations. You're looking at federal charges that carry sentences of 10 to 20 years. Rick lunged for the door, but 2 men in dark suits were waiting in the hallway. He was handcuffed and led away without a word. Melanie began to cry. Please, Mr. Mercer. I was just following Margaret's orders. She said the project was fake anyway, that you were just using poor people for some kind of twisted social experiment. She said we deserved compensation for being part of it. And you believe that justified stealing money from programs that feed hungry children? Alton asked. That gave you the right to destroy the reputations of people who genuinely wanted to help? As Melanie was led away by federal agents, Still sobbing and trying to explain herself, Alton turned to Tasha. "Are you hurt?" Tasha shook her head, though her hands were still trembling. "I'm okay. But Alton, the scope of what they were doing, it's so much bigger than we thought." "I know. That's why what happens next is so important." 3 hours later, Tasha found herself in a conference room she'd never seen before, located in a part of Haven Hands that had always been locked. The room was filled with reporters, cameras, and important-looking people in expensive suits. Through the window, she could see news vans lining the street. Alton stood at a podium, addressing the crowd with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce the launch of the Haven Legacy Project, a $20 million community investment initiative that will transform how we approach charitable giving in this city." Cameras flashed as he gestured toward Tasha, who sat at a table to his right, still trying to process how rapidly her life had changed. "The project will be headed by Tasha Owens, a remarkable woman who embodies the values we hope to promote: genuine compassion, unwavering integrity, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." A reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Mercer, Ms. Owens has no formal education in nonprofit management or large-scale philanthropy. Why choose someone without traditional qualifications?" Alton smiled. "Because traditional qualifications often measure the wrong things. Tasha has something more valuable than any degree: the proven ability to see people as human beings deserving of dignity and respect. Over the past month, while under observation, she consistently chose compassion over convenience, integrity over personal benefit." Another reporter called out, "What exactly will the Haven Legacy Project do?" Tasha took a deep breath and leaned toward her microphone. The first time she'd spoken in public like this, her voice carried more confidence than she felt. "Our first initiative will focus on single parents and transitional housing," she said. "We're creating a comprehensive support system that includes emergency financial assistance, job training programs, and childcare services. Too many families are one paycheck away from homelessness, and we're going to change that. We're also establishing the Margaret Winters Memorial Scholarship Fund." Tasha continued, surprising even Alton with this announcement. "Named ironically after someone who stole from the community, this fund will provide full college scholarships for young women aging out of the foster care system." The room buzzed with approval. Tasha felt a surge of confidence as she realized she was exactly where she belonged. That evening, local news led with the story. "Single mother chosen to lead $20 million charity," was the headline, followed by footage of Margaret, Melanie, and Rick being arrested for what prosecutors called one of the most sophisticated charity fraud schemes in the city's history. Tasha watched the coverage from her apartment, Malik beside her on the couch, both of them still processing the day's events. "Mom," Malik said quietly, "does this mean we don't have to worry about money anymore?" Tasha put her arm around her son. "It means we have an opportunity to help a lot of people who are worrying about the same things we used to worry about." Her phone buzzed with a text from Alton. "You didn't just help a homeless man today, Tasha. You passed the test most people fail. The hardest test of all, staying true to yourself when everything is falling apart around you." As she tucked Malik into bed that night, he asked, "What's going to happen to the bad people?" "They're going to face the consequences of their choices," Tasha replied. "But more importantly, we're going to make sure what they did wrong gets turned into something right." Outside her window, the city lights stretched endlessly, each one representing someone who might need help, someone who deserved a chance, someone who could be reached by the compassion that had started with one simple act of kindness to a quiet man eating soup. 6 months later, Tasha stood in the doorway of her new home, a modest but beautiful 3-bedroom house in a safe neighborhood with good schools. The moving boxes were finally unpacked, and Malik's artwork covered the refrigerator. Sunlight streamed through windows that actually opened properly, a luxury she'd never taken for granted before. "Mom, the foundation called," Malik said, running into the kitchen with the phone. "They want to know if you're ready for the site visit today." Tasha smiled and ruffled his hair. At 9 years old, Malik had become her unofficial assistant, taking messages and helping organize the community outreach events that had become a regular part of their lives. The boy who once worried about dinner was now helping coordinate food drives for other families in need. "Tell them I'll be there in an hour," she said, grabbing her keys and the folder of applications they'd be reviewing today. The drive to Haven Hands took her through neighborhoods she knew well, places where she'd once applied for jobs, stood in line for assistance, wondered how she'd make it through another month. Now she saw them differently, not as reminders of her struggles but as communities full of potential, full of people who just needed someone to believe in them. Haven Hands looked completely different now. The building had been renovated with bright paint, new windows, and a sign that actually hung straight. Inside, the space buzzed with activity, job training classes, after-school programs, support groups for single parents, and a computer lab where people could apply for work or continue their education. But the most important change was philosophical. This wasn't a place where people came to get charity anymore. It was a place where people came to build better lives, supported by programs designed to address root causes rather than just symptoms. "Tasha," called Maria Santos, the new program coordinator. "The scholarship recipients are here for their check-in meeting." In the main conference room, 12 young women sat around a table, each one a former foster child now pursuing college degrees fully funded by the Margaret Winters Memorial Scholarship Fund. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had tried to steal from the community was now forever remembered for funding education. "How's everyone doing?" Tasha asked, taking her seat at the table. The stories that followed were remarkable. Jessica was studying nursing and planned to work in community health. Amanda was majoring in social work, inspired by her own experiences in the system. Keisha was pursuing computer science, determined to create apps that would help other young people navigate resources and opportunities. "None of this would be possible without what you did," said Jessica. "You stood up to people who were stealing from us, and now we have chances we never thought we'd get." After the meeting, Tasha walked through the building, checking on various programs. In one room, single mothers attended a financial literacy class. In another, teenagers learned job interview skills. The computer lab was full of people updating resumes, taking online courses, or video calling with family members they couldn't afford to visit. Every corner of Haven Hands now served its original purpose, providing real help to real people. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alton. "Board meeting at 3 p.m. The quarterly impact report is ready." The Foundation's board meetings were held in a downtown office building, but Tasha insisted they remain brief and focused on results rather than bureaucracy. Today's report would show that the Haven Legacy Project had directly assisted over 2,000 families, funded scholarships for 150 students, and helped 300 people find stable employment. But the numbers, impressive as they were, didn't capture the real impact. They didn't show Mrs. Rodriguez, who now managed her diabetes properly because she could afford both medication and groceries. They didn't show Tommy, the veteran whose hands had stopped shaking once he found stable housing and purpose volunteering with other vets. They didn't show Sarah, the young mother who now had a college degree and a social work job helping other families in crisis. At the board meeting, Alton presented the financial reports while Tasha shared the human stories. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "You know," said Dr. Williams, one of the board members, "when Alton first told us about his unconventional selection process, some of us were skeptical. We thought he should choose someone with traditional credentials. And now?" Tasha asked. "Now we realize that what this project needed wasn't someone who knew how to run a charity. It needed someone who understood what it felt like to need one." After the meeting, Alton walked with Tasha to the parking garage. "Any regrets?" he asked. Tasha thought about the question seriously. Her life had changed dramatically, more responsibility, more pressure, more scrutiny. She was no longer anonymous, no longer just another single mother struggling to get by. "Just one," she said finally. Alton looked surprised. "I regret that it took me so long to realize that helping people isn't about having power or resources. It's about seeing them as human beings who deserve dignity and respect." That evening, Tasha returned to Haven Hands for the weekly community dinner, a tradition she'd insisted on maintaining. She still served food, still cleaned tables, still sat with people who reminded her of where she'd come from. Tonight, a new volunteer was helping in the kitchen, a young woman named Patricia who'd lost her job and needed community service hours for a housing assistance program. Tasha watched as Patricia interacted with the clients, noting her natural compassion and genuine concern for others. "Patricia," Tasha said as they cleaned up after dinner, "how would you feel about taking on some additional responsibilities here? Maybe helping coordinate our new mentorship program?" Patricia's eyes lit up. "Really? You trust me with something that important?" Tasha smiled, remembering another evening when someone had trusted her with importance she didn't think she deserved. "I believe in giving people chances," she said. "Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who understand what it feels like to need help." As they locked up Haven Hands that night, Tasha looked around at the bustling community center, at the programs that were changing lives, at the evidence that compassion could indeed transform everything. She walked to her car thinking about the press conference 6 months ago, when she told the world, "You never know who you're helping, and sometimes you're helping the very person who could change your life." Now she understood the deeper truth in those words. Alton had changed her life, yes. But she had changed his too. She had proven that his faith in human goodness wasn't naive, it was necessary. Tomorrow, she would be back here, looking for the next Patricia, the next person whose kindness just needed an opportunity to flourish. The work was just beginning.